The Steininger Beard Incident. Hans Steininger was 69 years old and held the world record for the longest beard. His facial hair measured 4.5 feet in length, flowing well past his waist when fully extended. Steininger lived in Braunau am Inn, Austria, where he served as a local official. The beard had grown over decades of careful cultivation and maintenance. For practical reasons, Steininger had developed a daily routine. Each morning, he would carefully roll his massive beard and secure it inside a leather pouch. This system allowed him to move freely through his daily activities without the beard dragging on the ground or catching on objects. The leather pouch had become as essential to his routine as putting on his shoes. The year was 1567, and Steininger had perfected his beard management system through years of trial and error. He would methodically coil the hair section by section, ensuring no tangles formed. The leather pouch hung from his belt, keeping the beard secure and out of the way. This routine had worked flawlessly for years, allowing him to maintain both his record-breaking facial hair and his mobility. On that September day, Steininger went about his usual morning preparations. He dressed for his official duties and prepared to leave his home. The beard rolling process was so automatic that he rarely thought about it anymore. His hands moved through the familiar motions of coiling and securing the hair. Then the fire began. Smoke started billowing from a building in the town center. The flames spread quickly between the wooden structures. Panic erupted as residents rushed to escape the growing inferno. Church bells rang out, warning the entire community of the emergency. Steininger heard the commotion and immediately understood the danger. Fire was every medieval town's greatest fear. Wooden buildings packed closely together created the perfect conditions for disaster. He needed to evacuate immediately. In his haste to flee, Steininger made a fatal oversight. The urgency of the situation disrupted his methodical routine. He rushed toward the door without properly securing his beard in its leather pouch. The massive length of hair unfurled as he moved, trailing behind him like a rope. Steininger ran through the streets, focused on escaping the spreading flames. His 4.5-foot beard flowed freely behind him, completely exposed and unrestrained. The hair that had made him famous now dragged across the cobblestones as he fled. In his panic, Steininger stepped directly onto his own beard. His foot caught the hair, jerking his head backward with tremendous force. The sudden stop sent him tumbling. His body twisted as he fell, unable to break the fall properly. Steininger hit the ground hard. The impact snapped his neck with a sharp crack. The man who had spent decades nurturing the world's longest beard died instantly, killed by the very feature that had brought him fame. His lifeless body lay on the street, his record-breaking beard spread around him. The chocolate factory incident. Svetlana Roslina was 24 years old and worked at the Sergeyev Posad confectionery factory in Fedortsovo, Russia. The facility produced chocolate on an industrial scale, operating massive machinery designed for commercial candy production. Svetlana had been employed at the factory for several months and was familiar with the equipment and safety protocols. The chocolate production process involved enormous vats. The molten mixture was thick, viscous, and deadly to anyone who might fall into it. On that day in 2016, Svetlana reported for her regular shift. The factory hummed with its usual activity as workers operated the complex machinery required for mass chocolate production. Steam rose from the heating vats and the sweet smell of chocolate filled the air. It was a routine workday at the confectionery facility. Svetlana carried her mobile phone with her during her shift, as was common for workers at the factory. The phone served as her connection to the outside world during the long work hours. She kept it close while performing her assigned duties around the production equipment. Two different accounts emerged about what happened next. Some witnesses reported that Svetlana accidentally dropped her phone near one of the massive chocolate vats. According to this version, she leaned over the edge of the container, trying to retrieve the device from where it had fallen. Other witnesses provided a different explanation. They claimed Svetlana was pouring flour into the chocolate mixture when her bag became caught. She allegedly leaned further into the vat while trying to free the stuck container, losing her balance in the process. Regardless of the exact cause, Svetlana fell forward into the vat of molten chocolate. Factory workers who witnessed the accident immediately attempted a rescue. They tried to reach Svetlana with long tools and equipment, but the depth of the vat and the dangerous nature of the molten chocolate made their efforts futile. The industrial machinery could not be stopped quickly enough to drain the container. Despite all rescue attempts, Svetlana could not be saved. She died from the severe burns and drowning caused by falling into the industrial chocolate vat. The 24-year-old factory worker became the victim of one of the most unusual workplace accidents ever recorded. The hospital soup incident. Ilda Vitor-Maciel was 88 years old when she suffered a stroke in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The elderly woman was immediately taken to a local hospital for emergency treatment. Her condition required intensive medical care and constant monitoring by the hospital staff. Due to complications from the stroke, Ilda could not eat solid food normally. The The hospital established a feeding routine for Ilda using a feeding tube. This medical device was inserted directly into her stomach, allowing liquid nutrition to bypass her mouth and throat. Feeding tubes are standard medical equipment used for patients who cannot swallow safely after strokes or other medical emergencies. Hospital protocol required staff to prepare liquid nutrition and deliver it through the feeding tube at regular intervals. The process involved connecting a syringe or feeding bag to the tube and slowly introducing the liquid nutrition directly into the patient's stomach. This procedure was routine and performed multiple times daily for patients like Ilda. The feeding process was straightforward and safe when performed correctly. Staff members were trained to distinguish between feeding tubes, which led to the stomach, and intravenous lines, which delivered fluids directly into the bloodstream. These two systems served completely different purposes and required different types of nutrition. On the day of the incident in 2012, hospital staff prepared soup for Ilda's feeding. The soup was intended to provide nutrition through her feeding tube, as had been done successfully on previous occasions. The liquid consistency made it suitable for tube feeding when properly administered. However, the hospital staff made a catastrophic error. Instead of connecting the feeding apparatus to Ilda's feeding tube, they mistakenly connected it to her intravenous line. This meant the soup would be injected directly into her bloodstream, rather than her stomach. The staff member began the feeding process without realizing the deadly mistake. Soup flowed through the IV line and entered Ilda's circulatory system. Medical staff quickly realized their error when Ilda began showing signs of severe distress. They immediately stopped the feeding process and began emergency treatment. However, the damage was already done. The soup had created multiple blockages throughout her circulatory system. Despite emergency interventions, the pulmonary embolism proved fatal. Ilda's cardiovascular system could not recover from the massive blockages caused by the soup injection. She died from complications directly related to the medical error that sent soup into her bloodstream instead of her stomach. The Deodorant Obsession Incident. Jonathan Capewell was 16 years old and lived with his family in Oldham, England. The teenager had developed an intense concern about personal hygiene and body odor. His worry about smelling unpleasant had grown into a daily obsession that controlled much of his routine. Jonathan's solution was to use deodorant extensively throughout each day. He would spray deodorant all over his entire body, not just his underarms as intended. This ritual occurred at least twice daily, sometimes more frequently if he felt particularly anxious about his scent. The deodorant Jonathan used contained propane and butane as propellants. These gases were designed to spray the deodorant effectively, then dissipate into the air. However, when used in large quantities in enclosed spaces, these chemicals could accumulate to dangerous levels. Jonathan performed his deodorant routine in his bedroom with the door closed. The confined space prevented proper ventilation, allowing the propane and butane gases to build up in the air. Each application added more chemicals to the already saturated atmosphere of his room. On the morning of his death in 1998, Jonathan followed his usual routine. He covered his entire body with deodorant spray in his closed bedroom. The familiar hissing sound of the aerosol filled the small space as he applied the product systematically. Within minutes of completing his deodorant application, Jonathan collapsed. His heart began beating irregularly as the accumulated chemicals reached toxic levels in his bloodstream. The propane and butane had disrupted his cardiac rhythm, triggering a massive heart attack. Jonathan's family found him unconscious in his bedroom. Emergency services arrived quickly, but the teenager was already beyond help. His heart had stopped functioning due to the chemical poisoning caused by months of excessive deodorant use. Medical examination revealed that Jonathan had 10 times the lethal dosage of propane and butane in his blood. His obsession with smelling fresh had killed him through chemical poisoning. 10 years later, the same tragic scenario repeated itself. Daniel Huxley, a 12-year-old boy from Nottingham, died under identical circumstances. Like Jonathan, Daniel had become obsessed with deodorant use and died from propane and butane poisoning. The younger boy's death proved that Jonathan's case was not an isolated incident, but a recurring danger of aerosol abuse. The Flying Fire Hydrant Incident. Humberto Hernandez was 24 years old and lived in Oakland, California. On that day in 2007, he was walking down a city street, going about his normal daily routine. The weather was typical for the area, and foot traffic moved at its usual pace through the urban neighborhood. Fire hydrants lined the streets of Oakland as standard municipal infrastructure. These metal fixtures connected directly to the city's water main system, providing emergency access for firefighters. Each hydrant contained water under tremendous pressure, designed to deliver large volumes quickly when needed. Humberto walked along the sidewalk, unaware of any impending danger. Traffic moved normally on the street beside him. Cars passed at regular speeds, their drivers focused on navigating the familiar urban routes. Nothing suggested that this would be anything other than an ordinary day. A car traveling down the street began to veer off course. The vehicle's trajectory shifted toward the sidewalk area where the fire hydrants were positioned. The driver appeared to lose control of the vehicle for reasons that remained unclear to witnesses. The car struck the fire hydrant with significant force. The impact immediately severed the hydrant's connection to the underground water main. Instantly, pressurized water began erupting from the broken connection point with tremendous force. The severed fire hydrant became a projectile. The water pressure launched the heavy metal fixture into the air with tremendous velocity. The hydrant, weighing approximately 200 pounds, flew through the air like a missile fired from an invisible cannon. Witnesses to the incident could barely comprehend what they had seen. The sequence of events seemed impossible. A person killed by a flying fire hydrant powered by water pressure. The statistical probability of such an occurrence was astronomical. Humberto Hernandez died from blunt force trauma caused by being struck by a pressurized fire hydrant. The 24-year-old had become the victim of one of the most improbable accidents ever recorded in urban America. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.